Migration works its way back onto the list of divisive topics among EU leaders as they fail to reach an agreement at a summit in Brussels.
In France, there's fears of a fourth night of rioting, and with 40,000 police on the streets, the government has said it may declare a state of emergency.
The UN calls on Moscow and Kiev to stop using explosive weapons in populated areas of Ukraine as civilian casualties rise.
One of the most divisive issues of the past few years is once again back on the EU's agenda, none other than migration. Poland and Hungary hijacked talks at a summit in Brussels on Thursday and Friday, leaving leaders without any final decision on the topic. They didn't even manage to come to an agreement on how to tackle the external dimension of migration, despite the fact that reaching agreements with non-EU countries is the approach that has more consensus among member states.
La mejor manera de resolver el impacto de la migración irregular dentro de nuestras fronteras es reforzar la cooperación entre los países de la Unión y los países de tránsito y los países de origen, pues es que me parece de puro sentido común, ¿no? Yo, a lo largo de estas 5 o 6 horas que hemos tenido de debate sobre la migración, no me ha dejado de sorprender la ceguera de algunos en el sentido de no reconocer la necesidad de incorporar la dimensión exterior al Pacto de Migración y Asilo.
Budapest and Warsaw are unhappy with the asylum agreement reached between EU countries early in June, which means that member states must share the burden of migrants more fairly. The two voted against it, but it was approved by most EU countries. Now Poland has announced a national referendum on the issue, even if Brussels has already said that the asylum agreement must be respected.
Polacy się mogli wypowiedzieć, czy chcą bezpiecznego kraju, czy chcą takich obrazków, jakie do nas docierają z niektórych miast, przedmieść zachodniej Europy.
The second topic that dominated the summit agenda was Ukraine. EU leaders insist that support will continue whatever it takes, which means giving long-term financial support and to work on security guarantees for the embattled country. The European Commission has also promised to work on how to use frozen Russian assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine, an extremely tricky legal issue.
France remains very tense in some urban areas after a third night of rioting since police shot dead a teenager in a suburb of Paris. And as our correspondent Annelise Bourges reports, the government is struggling to respond.
Despite a heavy presence of police across France on Thursday night, this is the scene here in the French capital on Friday morning. This is one of the many shops in this area that has been looted. Some 600 people have been detained across the country. 40,000 police officers had been deployed, but the French government continues to scramble to come up with a response to the escalation in violence. The French President Emmanuel Macron is said to be returning early from that EU summit in Brussels. He will hold a crisis meeting this afternoon, and authorities continue to appeal for calm, where those calls have not been heeded by a large part of the population in suburbs who say the killing of Nael, the 17-year-old who was shot by police on Tuesday, just reignites old grievances among a population that says they have been discriminated against for generations. They feel they are the victims of police brutality, police harassment, and that now that they have the country's attention, they will continue taking to the streets to voice their anger. And they say they hope that that anger can be translated into change for future generations. Annelise Bourges is in Paris for Euronews.
A call for Russia and Ukraine to avoid using high explosives in populated areas. The UN's representative of disarmament says the war is continuing to take a heavy toll on civilian life, especially when residential areas are targeted.
The vast majority of civilian casualties are a result of the use of explosive weapons with wide area effects. The missile attack in central Kramatorsk on 27th of June, which killed 12 people, is a case in point. The Secretary General has unequivocally urged all sides to avoid the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, as such use is highly likely to result in indiscriminate harm.
Moscow denies it is targeting civilians. Its representative blamed the West for arming Ukraine.
Угрозы, порождаемые поставками западного вооружения на Украину, продолжают нарастать и множиться на фоне непрекращающихся попыток наших бывших партнеров в очередной раз переложить на Россию всю ответственность за происходящее на Украине.
At least 12 people, including children, were killed and 65 injured in a Russian attack on a building in the city of Kramatorsk. It's the latest in a series of deadly strikes on civilian areas in Ukraine.
Inflation in the Eurozone has fallen again, but it's unlikely to ease high prices for food and goods anytime soon. The year-on-year rate was 5.5% in June, down from 6.1% in May, and continuing the declining trend seen in recent months. Despite the fall, the cost of everyday items remains stubbornly high in Europe compared with other Western economies. It's been fueled by higher energy and labour costs and Russia's war in Ukraine. Worryingly for Eurozone financial chiefs, core inflation, which strips out food and fuel prices, has risen slightly from 5.3 to 5.4%. That signals the ECB will likely have to continue its policy of raising interest rates again as it struggles to hit its target inflation rate of 2%. The ECB has raised rates 8 times in a row, from minus 0.5% to 3.5%, and at least one more hike is expected.
No agreement was reached on how to tackle illegal immigration on the opening day of the European Union summit. Although leaders of member states held a debate on how to stop the flow and how to share the burden of hosting refugees.
No white smoke came out from the leaders' meeting on migration. Hungary and Poland kept their colleagues awake for hours, insisting that the consensus rule should come back when it comes to migration and asylum policy, rejecting any aspect of mandatory solidarity.
A political agreement has been reached on binding solidarity and the external dimension of the Union's immigration and asylum policy. Now it needs to be implemented.
We cannot continue a situation where people without permits simply travel through Europe and to countries and live under circumstances that are not acceptable. So this is one of the converging, I would say, views in Europe right now, that we simply have to do something about that.
But a common approach still seems far away. Frontline states like Greece and Italy want stricter measures on border protection and also innovative ideas for tackling smugglers and outsourcing asylum processes to third countries like Tunisia or Egypt. While others like Germany, Luxembourg and Portugal stress the need for further respect of human rights and international law. The leaders will resume their talks on Friday morning on migration, economy and China. Extremely low water levels at a reservoir in Spain have revealed the ruins of an ancient village. La Isabela was submerged when the Buendia Dam in Castilla-La Mancha was created in 1952. A sustained drought in Spain has reduced the level of the water in the reservoir to 22% of its normal height. Overall, the region's reservoirs are down nearly 40%. Recent heavy rains have not been enough to replenish the country's water reserves.
Paris Saint-Germain coach Christophe Galtier and his son were detained by French police on Friday in a racism investigation. Galtier, who is on his way out at PSG but still under contract, denied accusations that he made racist and Islamophobic remarks when he was in charge of French club Nice. But French media have published reports of a leaked email from former Nice director of football Julien Fournier to the club's owners, in which he accused Galtier of saying there were too many black and Muslim players in the squad.
Spaceport America in New Mexico and liftoff for Virgin Galactic's first commercial flight into space.
Now, MCC's in my ear. They're telling us we're 1 minute away from release. and trim is set. We're now traveling at approximately Mach 1.4.
4 Italians on board spent 10 minutes in space
Starting their experiments in their seat.
on the 90-minute mission.
Viva la Italia!
A short flight, but a big step for space tourism.
Call to the mission specialists.
Bulgaria's beaches, hundreds of kilometers southwest across the Black Sea from Ukraine's shoreline. But tourist businesses are blaming a fall in visitors on fears its own waters will be contaminated by the ecological disaster suffered by Ukraine when the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed. Bulgarian officials say it's safe to go in the water.
Гарантират резултатите на пробите, които вземаме по Северното Черноморие. До момента не показват превишения от месец юни миналата година. До момента няма такива превишения.
Tourism officials say there's little to indicate visitors are deterred by the possibility beaches may be polluted. They say other factors should be considered.
Има много, не една причината това да, разбира се, да е факт. И едно от основните неща, върху които ние трябва да се замислим, и това от години го говорим, е именно структурата и качеството на нашия продукт. Защото когато виждаме, че се случва нещо такова, ние в повечето случаи се опитваме да търсим вината извън нас, но в крайна сметка бизнесът е този, който трябва да генерира своите приходи, да генерира туристопотока към себе си, що се касае до туризма.
While the ebb in the flow of tourists may have been caused by other factors, there's little doubt the dam's destruction, blamed by the West on Russia, is a major ecological disaster, which may yet have an impact on Ukraine's Black Sea neighbours.